A homeless man steals a bag in the park and, upon opening it, finds a notebook filled with drawings by a girl battling a deadly illness. He wants to return the notebook. This decision will save not only a child's life, but his own as well. The touching ending of this story brought everyone to tears. If you're ready, let's begin. The night seemed crueler than ever. Eduardo, with torn clothes and a blanket as thin as paper, was curled up on a park bench. His fingers, hardened by the cold, could barely hold an empty disposable coffee cup. Around him, the park seemed to breathe life. Children running, laughter in the distance, families united in a world of which he was no longer a part. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore the hunger that made his stomach ache. When was the last time he ate something decent? When was the last time he felt that someone looked at him and saw more than a shadow? The answer seemed buried in memories he preferred to forget. The minutes passed like hours. He watched a woman sitting on a nearby bench checking her cell phone while a little girl played on the swings. The girl wore a colorful scarf on her head and smiled as if the world were a perfect place. Eduardo couldn't understand how anyone could smile so fully in such a cold and unjust world. But seeing that scene awakened something he was trying to bury. Flashes of his own daughter, Isabella, running barefoot across the yard years ago, laughing as she tried to catch a kite. A knot tightened in his chest. He pushed the memory away, but the emptiness in his stomach was relentless. I just need to survive one more night, he thought. It was always like that, one day at a time. Eduardo felt a lump in his throat as his eyes remained fixed on the woman in the park. She seemed distracted, laughing softly as she looked at her cell phone. He knew that something was wrong, but the hunger burned inside him, becoming more and more unbearable. Just this once, he told himself, as if he needed permission just to be able to eat something. With silent steps, he approached the bag the woman had left on the bench. His heart was beating so loudly that he could hear the sound in his ears, drowning out the girl's laughter. When his fingers touched the leather of the bag, something inside him screamed to stop, but he ignored it. In one swift movement, Eduardo took it and began to walk quickly. The girl on the swing looked directly at him. It was only for a second, but Eduardo felt a chill. She saw him. She would know what he had done, but there was no time to think. He quickened his pace and soon he was running through the empty park, feeling guilt mixed with adrenaline as he ran. Flashes of his life passed through his mind. The face of his daughter, Isab, suddenly appeared. He remembered when she looked at him years ago, with eyes full of tears, and asked him why he was never there. Dad. It was a memory he had tried to bury, but now it came back with a vengeance. Eduardo stopped in a dark alley, panting, lit only by the yellowish light of a distant lamppost. Eduardo opened the bag with trembling fingers. Anxiety boiled in his head, mixed with hunger and guilt. He repeated to himself, "Please let there be something here, anything." But when he opened the zipper, he found only a notebook. No money, nothing of value, just a notebook with childish drawings scribbled on the cover. He picked it up, feeling a mixture of frustration and curiosity. What was it doing there? Why would anyone bring something like this? As he leafed through the first few pages, Eduardo was overcome by an unexpected wave of emotion. Each page was filled with colorful drawings and simple words, but full of meaning. He saw a giant balloon floating in the sky, a beach with vibrant blue waves, and a sky full of stars. Next to each drawing were phrases written in shaky handwriting, as if they were dreams scribbled down quickly. To see a balloon up close, to eat cotton candy on the beach, to look at the stars in the sky. In the middle of the pages, a piece of paper fell to the floor. Eduardo picked it up and read it. At first he read automatically, but his hands began to tremble as the words took on weight. For my little Elena, who never stops dreaming. Then he saw something that made his chest tighten. A photograph was trapped between two pages of the notebook. It was of a girl with no hair and big eyes full of life. Despite her visibly fragile body, she smiled in such a pure way that she seemed to defy any pain or sadness. Eduardo felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing his heart. Who was that girl? Why did those drawings seem so important? For a moment he felt like an intruder, someone who had invaded a space he shouldn't have entered. He closed the notebook and looked at the empty bag, trying to decide what to do. The voices in his head were at war. One told him to throw everything away and move on. Another whispered that he needed to know more. What was so special about that notebook? As he held the object in his hands, Eduardo felt something strange. It was as if, for the first time in years, something was calling him, but he didn't know if it was strength or fear that was preventing him from leaving at that moment. All he knew was that he couldn't leave the notebook behind. Eduardo felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stared at the photo for several long minutes, unable to look away. Who was that girl? Why did that smile seem to speak directly to him? He returned to the notebook and began to leaf through it, but now more carefully. Each drawing seemed like a small portal to her dreams. There was a balloon floating in the sky with the phrase scribbled in childish letters. "See a giant balloon." Another page showed a beach with blue waves and a girl running on the sand, eating cotton candy on the beach. Further on, a starry sky. Look at the stars up close. As he looked at the drawings, Eduardo felt something break inside him. They were such simple dreams, so pure. Dreams that any child should be able to fulfill effortlessly. But there was something about that notebook, something about the shaky lines and vibrant colors that made him realize that these desires were more than just simple wishes. They seemed like a cry for help. He turned another page and saw another phrase that took his breath away. Embrace the sun. What did that mean? Eduardo held the notebook as if it were made of glass, feeling a wave of emotions he didn't know how to explain. He remembered his own daughter, Isabella, and how her little wishes had been forgotten amid the chaos that his life had become. But why was this happening now? Why had he, who could barely take care of himself, found that notebook? Eduardo looked again at the photo of the girl. Her smile seemed to answer a question he had not yet been able to formulate. Sitting in that dark alley, he realized that something inside him was changing for the first time in years. He felt a spark of compassion, a feeling he thought he had lost forever. But what could he do? He did not know yet. Even so, an idea began to form in his mind. I have to return this. That girl needs this notebook more than I need a piece of bread. Eduardo sat down on the cold floor of the alleyway with the notebook still clutched to his chest. He lifted the notebook and looked at it as if it were something alive. He knew that if he left that object behind, he could continue with his life, invisible, lost, with no ties to anyone. But something was holding him back. The girl in the photo, with that impossible smile, seemed to look at him through the image, as if she were waiting for him to make the right decision. He shook his head, annoyed with himself. This isn't my problem, he tried to convince himself, but the truth was that he couldn't take his eyes off the notebook. Every page he turned seemed to whisper to him, begging him not to forget her. Memories began to flood back. Like a hurricane, Eduardo remembered his daughter Isabella and how he had failed to be the father she needed. He had promised to take care of her, but he lost everything before he could keep his word. Would returning that notebook somehow make up for all the mistakes of the past? But at the same time, fear overwhelmed him. What would he do if he went to the park and the girl was still there? Would her mother believe him? How would he explain that he had stolen something so valuable? He had no answers, only doubts that kept him paralyzed, holding the notebook tightly. Eduardo felt warm, unexpected tears welling up. He hadn't cried in years. He had convinced himself that there was nothing left inside him that was worth feel. But now, there in the middle of that frozen alley, a question would not leave his mind. What if this notebook was the only thing keeping this girl dreaming? With a heavy sigh, he stood up, the decision still floating like a fog. Eduardo walked in circles, clutching the notebook to his chest. The night seemed colder, heavier, as if the universe wanted to test his determination. Every step he took forward seemed to be followed by 2 steps of doubt backward. What if they call the police? What if they think I want to steal something again? What if she's not there anymore? But then he opened the notebook once more, his hands trembling as his eyes scanned the drawings that were already beginning to look familiar, as if he had seen them before in some forgotten dream. He stopped at a specific page, a child holding the hand of an adult with a giant sun shining overhead. Next to the drawing were the words, I want to find someone to to help me reach the sun." The phrase echoed in his mind louder than the biting wind of dawn. Eduardo closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. He didn't know why, but he felt he had to do something. "I'm nobody," he thought, "but maybe I can be somebody." Just for today, he took a deep breath, trying to silence the voice inside him, telling him to give up. The doubts were still there, whispering insistently. But now there was another voice, weaker, almost muffled, but impossible to ignore. "You can still do the right thing." Without knowing how he would find the owner of the notebook, Eduardo began to walk back to the park. Each step seemed laden with fear, but also with something new, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Deep down, Eduardo knew he had no guarantees. All he had was the notebook, a handful of drawn dreams, and a question that pounded at his heart. Could it be that by returning this notebook, he could return something she had lost, or perhaps something he had lost? As he approached the trees surrounding the park, Eduardo felt his heart racing. He looked around, searching for the colorful scarf, the smile that had remained etched in his mind. The sound of the leaves moving in the wind seemed louder than his breathing, and the weight of his doubts made each step more difficult. Then he saw her. Elena was there on the swing, the girl in the photo. The smile still lit up her face, but now, seen up close, Eduardo noticed the effort behind it. Every movement seemed calculated, as if her body were fighting against an invisible weight. Her mother, the same woman he had seen before, was sitting on a nearby bench, attentive but clearly exhausted. Eduardo felt his heart racing. "It's her," he thought. For a moment, everything he had to do seemed simple. Walk up to them, hold out the notebook, and return what should never have been taken. But as he took the first step, an avalanche of doubts paralyzed him. What if they think I'm trying to trick them? What if I scare the girl? How do I explain that I stole the bag? He looked at the notebook, then at Elena, and his mind returned to the drawings. Each page held dreams so simple, yet so urgent. He wondered how many of those wishes could still be fulfilled. Or worse, what if she didn't have time to fulfill them all? With trembling legs, Eduardo tried to approach again. Each step made the weight of what he had done feel harder to bear. He imagined the mother getting up, pointing at him, and asking for help. He imagined Elena cowering in fear when she saw him, as if he were a threat. Without realizing it, Eduardo stopped again a few feet from the couple. He froze, the notebook still firmly in his hands. Elena, as if sensing something, turned toward him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Eduardo saw something that completely disarmed him. Curiosity, not fear. Eduardo took a step back, then another. He hid behind a tree, breathing heavily, fighting the guilt that now seemed to crush him. He wanted to return the notebook, but he felt he was not worthy of being there, near something so pure. From a distance, he watched Elena return to playing, still smiling. Eduardo closed his eyes tightly, as if he wanted to engrave that moment forever. Eduardo felt that he could no longer run away. The weight of the notebook in his hands was like an anchor that kept him grounded, but it was also the only thing that drove him forward. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to walk toward the swing. Each step felt heavier than the last. His mind was a whirlwind of doubts and excuses. What if she cries? What if I only make things worse? But then he saw her again. Elena was now standing next to the swing, with the colorful scarf tied tightly around her head. Eduardo could see the smile on her lips. It was not the smile of someone who did not know pain. It was something much deeper, almost indescribable, as if she carried within her the ability to find light in any darkness. When her eyes met his, something unexpected happened. Eduardo felt his heart race, but not out of fear. Elena's gaze held no judgment, fear, or mistrust. Instead, there was something he couldn't see. For a long time, an almost impossible kindness, as if she had been waiting for him. For a moment, Eduardo thought about turning away, but Elena's smile paralyzed him. Without realizing it, he was getting closer, closer and closer when he stopped a few steps away from her. His hands were shaking so much that he could barely hold the notebook. "I think this is yours," he whispered, holding out the notebook. unable to look directly at the mother who was watching him cautiously from the background. Elena looked at the notebook as if it were a lost treasure. She took a step forward, took it with both hands, and remained silent for a moment. Then suddenly she looked at him in the eyes and smiled a smile so wide and bright that it seemed to illuminate all the darkness around them. "Thank you," she said in a sweet, soft voice. Before Eduardo could say anything, she took a step forward and hugged him tightly, as if they were lifelong friends. Eduardo stood still, surprised. The warmth of Elena's embrace was so unexpected, so genuine, that he couldn't hold back the tears that began to run down his face. He tried to say something, perhaps apologize, but his voice wouldn't come out. "I knew you would find it," Elena said, still hugging him as if her words were the most natural thing in the world. "You knew?" Eduardo managed to murmur, confused. Elena stepped back a little, but kept her small hands holding the notebook tightly. "Yes, the sun always helps lost people." The simplicity of the phrase completely overwhelmed Eduardo. He felt the lump in his throat grow even stronger. Who was this girl who seemed to see something in him that he himself couldn't see? From the bench, Elena's mother watched the scene, still suspicious, but something in her eyes showed that she was also moved. Eduardo looked at her briefly, expecting some gesture of reproach, but Elena, with her innocence and sincerity, had transformed that moment into something much greater than he could have imagined. As Elena pressed the notebook against her chest, Eduardo understood something. That simple gesture, her smile, her hug. Not only had she disarmed him, she had freed him. Elena moved away a little, but kept her hands clutching the notebook tightly to her chest. Her deep, innocent eyes met his, and she smiled again. "You're a good person." Those words struck Eduardo like a bolt of lightning. He tried to protest, to shake his head, to say she was wrong, but the sincerity in her gaze was undeniable. "No," he began, but his voice faltered. Elena interrupted him with a simple but devastating phrase. "The notebook found you because it knew you could return it." Eduardo remained silent, confused, but deeply moved. In the distance, Elena's mother watched the scene with a mixture of relief and curiosity on her face. Eduardo felt he should say something, perhaps explain what had happened, but the intensity of the moment with Elena kept him motionless while Elena hugged the notebook tightly, leafing through its pages as if she were reuniting with a lost friend. Eduardo felt something different for the first time in years. He didn't feel like a burden to the world. He felt needed. Does she really need me? Or am I the one who needs her? The question echoed in his mind. Eduardo was about to take a step back, thinking that his moment with Elena was over. But before he could walk away, she took his hand with force. Her small but warm fingers grabbed his, as if they didn't want to let go. "Can you sit here with me?" she asked, her eyes shining with expectation. The question took Eduardo by surprise. He looked at Elena, then at the mother sitting on the bench. Camila, the mother, kept her gaze fixed on him. Her eyes reflected distrust, but also exhaustion and hope, as if she wanted to believe that he was not a threat, but was afraid to allow herself to believe it, or not. Eduardo didn't know what to say, or what to do. He felt he had no right to be there, that he didn't belong in that moment, but Elena's gaze was so sincere, so innocent, that it broke down all his barriers. "I think your mom started it," Eduardo began, pointing to Camila, trying to find an excuse to back out. "Mom will understand," Elena said with a confident smile. "You returned my notebook. That means you're a good person." The simplicity of the phrase had a profound impact on him. He looked at the mother again, waiting for some reaction. Camila sat up a little, crossing her arms, but said nothing. Her eyes continued to evaluate him, but she did not approach. "Please," Elena insisted, tilting her head to one side as if she did not understand. Why did he continue to hesitate, with a lump in his throat? Eduardo finally got up and sat down next to her, uncomfortable, as if he were entering a forbidden place. The bench felt uncomfortable, but it wasn't the bench. It was the weight of everything he was feeling. Elena placed the notebook on her lap and began to leaf through it again, her eyes lighting up with each page as if she were rediscovering parts of herself. Eduardo watched her silently, not knowing what to say or how to act. "Did you know that dreams can be drawn?" she asked without looking up from the notebook. Eduardo was confused for a moment, but replied in a whisper, "No, I never thought about it." Elena looked at him with a smile that seemed to contain all the secrets of the universe. "My notebook is full of dreams. They're small now, but one day, when I'm well, they'll grow." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. There was something in the way she said it that made it seem like she truly believed it, with all the strength of her little body. But there was a silent question in the air. What if that day never comes? From the bench in the distance, Camila continued to watch them, but something in her posture had changed. The mistrust was still there, but now it seemed mixed with something softer, almost imperceptible gratitude. Eduardo looked at Elena again, and for the first time, managed to smile genuinely. He didn't know why, but he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could be useful there. "I think you have more dreams than anyone I've ever met," he said, almost without realizing it. Elena laughed softly and replied, "Then maybe you can help me fulfill them." "Look," said Elena, showing him the first page. It was a drawing of a colorful balloon floating in the sky with a boy and a girl smiling inside. "This is my dream of seeing a giant balloon up close. I want to know what it feels like to fly." Eduardo couldn't help but smile. It was such a simple drawing, but full of life. The way Elena explained it was as if she had already been there, flying in the balloon, that she herself had created with vibrant colors. "What is this?" asked Eduardo, pointing to the next drawing. Elena turned the page. There was a beach with blue waves and a boy running on the sand with a giant cotton candy in his hand. "I want to go to the beach, eat cotton candy, and feel the sand on my feet," she said excitedly. But there was a tone of urgency in her words that Eduardo couldn't ignore. He felt a lump in his throat. The simplicity of those wishes made him think of all the things he had taken for granted before his life fell apart. He looked at Elena, who was carefully leafing through the notebook, and realized that for her, those dreams were everything. Then Elena turned to a different page. The lines were more delicate, and the colors seemed softer. It was a drawing of a girl lying in a field full of stars, looking up at the sky. Eduardo looked at the drawing and felt a lump in his throat. "This one is special," Elena said with a small but sincere smile. "I want to see the stars up close before—" She paused, and Eduardo noticed that her voice had trembled. "Before what?" he asked. The question came out before he could stop himself. Elena sighed and looked up at the sky for a moment, as if searching for an answer among the clouds. Then she turned her eyes back to Eduardo, with an expression that was both peaceful and sad. "Before I, too, become a little star in the sky." Her words hit him like a punch. Eduardo felt the world spin for a moment, as if something had fallen into the abyss inside him. He tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. "Mom says that when special people leave, they become little stars in the sky. But before that, I want to do everything I drew here," Elena continued, as if she were telling the most natural thing in the world. Natural thing in the world. Eduardo closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. He had never felt so small in front of someone so young. How could she talk about her own mortality with such calmness, such acceptance, and at the same time, how could she carry so much desire to live? As Elena leafed through the notebook again, explaining another drawing with the same joy as before, Eduardo felt something change inside him. For the first time, he realized that those dreams were not only hers, they could also be his. And if he could help fulfill at least one of those dreams, he thought, there is still time to do something good in my life. Elena didn't know it, but she was already transforming Eduardo in ways he couldn't imagine. As he looked at her drawings, he felt he could no longer turn back. He needed to do something, even if he didn't know how. "Here," said Elena, stopping at a specific page. She looked at Eduardo with a meaningful smile, as if she already knew the impact that drawing would have. Eduardo. He leaned in to look at the illustration. It was simple, but deeply symbolic. A bright sun radiating golden light held the hand of a man made of shadows, with dark, clumsy strokes. The contrast was so strong that Eduardo was paralyzed. Who are they?" Eduardo asked in a faltering voice. Elena touched the drawing with her index finger, pointing first to the sun. "This is the sun. It illuminates everything, even the darkest corners," she explained in her sweet but convincing voice. Then she moved her finger to the man made of shadows and said, "This one? This is... Ooh." Her words were like a blow. Eduardo looked at the drawing again without Endo, feeling something tighten in his chest. He tried to protest, shaking his head. "No, you're wrong. I'm not like that." Elena tilted her head to one side as if confused by his response. Her innocent but wise eyes looked at him with an intensity that Eduardo did not expect. "If it's you, I knew I would find you. The sun takes the hand of those who are lost." Eduardo felt tears begin to well up, but he tried to hide them by looking away. How could a little girl see something so profound in someone he himself despised? How could she believe that he, who had stolen her notebook, deserved to be represented in something so symbolic? "Do you think I could be the sun?" he asked in a whisper. Elena shook her head, smiling. "No, you are the man of shadows, but the sun found you, and now you can walk with it." Her words were so simple, but they carried a depth that Eduardo didn't know how to process. He felt that she was talking about something bigger than he could understand at that moment. "Why did you draw this?" Eduardo asked, still trying to understand. Elena shrugged as if the answer were obvious. Because she dreamed about him before meeting him. The statement made Eduardo swallow hard. He didn't know what to say. How could she have dreamed about him? How was that possible? He looked at the drawing again, trying to find answers that didn't come. "And what happens next?" Eduardo asked, scared, pointing to the drawing. Elena looked at him and smiled with a sparkle in her eyes that seemed to contain all the answers in the universe. "After that, the man of shadows also begins to shine." Eduardo could no longer hold back the tears. They rolled silently as he looked at that girl who, with such simple words, was beginning to illuminate parts of him that he didn't even know existed. While Eduardo was still trying to process Elena's words and the impact of the drawing she had shown him, a soft but firm voice brought him back to reality. "Can I talk to you?" said Camila, Elena's mother, approaching slowly. Eduardo looked up, his heart racing, feeling a mixture of shame and fear. Camila had an expression that was difficult to decipher. She wasn't cold, but she carried the caution of someone who had already faced many battles. "Thank you for returning her notebook," Camila said sincerely but without completely letting her guard down. Eduardo nodded, trying to find words, but nothing seemed sufficient. "I'm so sorry for what I did," he murmured in a low, almost inaudible voice. "I just didn't know what I was doing." Camila looked at him silently for a moment. Eduardo felt the weight of that gaze, as if she were trying to see beyond his worn appearance and the wrong actions that had led him there. Then, surprisingly, she took a deep breath and smiled a small but genuine smile. "You know, Elena was inconsolable when she realized her notebook was gone. I thought we'd never see it again, but for some reason, she never lost hope. She said the notebook would find its way back." Camila Ila looked at Elena, who was now engrossed in another of her drawings, and then turned her eyes to Eduardo. It seems she was right. Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know what to say. The gratitude in Camila's eyes was something he didn't think he deserved. "Would you like some coffee?" Camila asked. Suddenly, in a lighter tone, "It's the least I can do to thank you." Eduardo froze. He looked at Elena, then at Camila. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to say it wasn't necessary, that he wasn't worthy of such a kind gesture, but something in Camila's gaze made him hesitate. "I don't know if he began to say, but his voice was interrupted, softly but firmly. "You gave back something that is more important to us than you can imagine. That already says a lot about you." Eduardo felt a wave of emotions wash over him. There was something about this mother that left him defenseless. It wasn't just the invitation, it was what was behind it. It was as if she were giving him a chance to be a better person, to be part of something, even if only for a moment. "All right," he finally said with a trembling voice. "I accept." Camila smiled again, this time a more open smile. "Then let's go." As they began to walk together, Elena took Eduardo's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He looked down, surprised by the gesture, but said nothing. He simply felt that small touch as something that warmed his heart in a way he couldn't explain. The small cafe had a cozy atmosphere, but Eduardo felt out of place. While the aroma of fresh bread and hot coffee filled the air, he sat in his chair with his hands fidgeting on the table, avoiding looking directly at Camila, who was sitting across from him, and Elena, who was next to her, leafing through the pages of her notebook with a carefree smile. Camila thanked the waiter when he placed the cups on the table and then looked at Eduardo. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and untold stories. Then Eduardo began, "Camila," in a soft but firm voice, "What brought you here?" Eduardo looked at the coffee in front of him, the words stuck in his throat. He knew that question wasn't about the park. She wanted to know more. She wanted to understand. Who was the man who had returned the notebook? "It's a long story," he murmured, trying to avoid the subject. But Camila didn't look away. There was something in her eyes that told Eduardo she knew what it was like to carry an invisible weight. "We have time," she replied, encouraging him. Eduardo took a deep breath, feeling the knot in his chest tighten. He knew that if he remained silent, that weight would suffocate him. So for the first time in years, he began to speak. I had a family, a wife, a daughter." His voice trembled, and he clenched his hands as if he needed strength to continue. "But they died." Camila opened her eyes in surprise. For a moment, she said nothing. She just waited, giving him space to continue talking. "It was an accident. One of those normal days when you never think your life is going to change. And it did." He swallowed, feeling the tears well up. "After that, I lost everything. I lost myself, I lost my job, I lost my house. I lost everything that made sense." Elena, who was listening attentively to the conversation, put her notebook down on the table and took Eduardo's hand. The gesture was simple, but full of warmth, and that made him finally look at her. "Is that why you were in the park?" she asked with genuine curiosity, but without judgment. Eduardo nodded, unable to find the words. Camila then looked at her daughter and then at Eduardo, as if deciding whether she should share what she was about to say. After a brief moment, she sighed. "You know, Eduardo, life puts us in places we never imagined we'd be." Her voice began to break. "When Elena was 5, she was diagnosed with leukemia. We fought hard, and she was so strong." Camila paused, taking a deep breath to keep from crying. Eduardo felt his heart tighten. He knew what was coming would not be easy to hear. "We thought we had won, but a few months ago, the doctors said the disease had returned, and this time, there's not much they can do." Eduardo stood motionless, looking at Camila. Her words were like knives piercing his heart. He looked at Elena, who continued to smile as if she didn't understand what those words meant. "The doctors gave us only a few months to live," Camila continued, her eyes filled with tears. "But as long as she can keep dreaming, as long as she can smile, I will do everything in my power to make her happy." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Eduardo felt tears running down his face before he could hold them back. He looked at Elena, who was watching him with a look full of hope, as if she wanted to tell him that everything would be all right, even though the world was falling apart. "I'll start," Eduardo began, but his voice broke. He took a deep breath and tried again. "I don't know what I can do, but I want to help." Camila looked at him in surprise. Eduardo felt that he was promising something much bigger than himself, but at that moment, he didn't care. Elena had touched something inside him that he didn't even know still existed. "Thank you," Camila said with a trembling smile. Elena squeezed her hand once more. "Will you help me fulfill my dreams?" she asked, looking up at him. The question was so direct, so simple, that Eduardo almost lost his breath. He looked at Camila as if seeking guidance, but she just watched him silently with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "I will," Eduardo began, but the words seemed too heavy. He looked at Elena again, at that expectant gaze, and felt something change inside him. She turned to another page showing a drawing of the beach. "I want to feel the sand on my feet. I want to see the sea. Have you seen the sea, Eduardo?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, but it was a long time ago." Elena smiled, as if that answer was exactly what she wanted to hear. "Then you can take me. I want to see what it's like. Really like." Eduardo felt the lump in his throat tighten. He looked at the pages of the notebook, each one filled with dreams so simple but so meaningful. Each one was a reminder of what he had forgotten, the importance of living, of finding joy in the little things. "Elena, I don't know if I can do this." He paused, feeling the tears well up again. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this." Elena tilted her head to one side as if she didn't understand. "Why what?" He hesitated. "Of course you are. You found my notebook." Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the wave of emotions. He knew he was facing something bigger than himself. He knew that promise would change everything. "So what do you say?" Elena asked again with a smile full of hope. Eduardo looked at her, then at Camila, and felt something awaken in his heart. It was as if, for the first time in years, he had a chance to do something that really mattered. He took a deep breath and held Elena's small hand. "I promise you, we're going to make all your dreams come true." Elena smiled, and in that moment, Eduardo saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: true hope. Camila, on the other side of the table, wiped away a tear that was silently running down her cheek. She knew that promise was as important to Eduardo as it was to Elena. As they left the cafe, Eduardo held the notebook as if it were a map to an unknown destination, but one he was willing to go no matter what it took. The sound of the waves filled the air, mixed with Elena's soft laughter as she ran barefoot on the sand. The sun was high, spreading its gentle warmth over everything around them. Eduardo watched from afar, his feet sunk in the sand, feeling his heart warm in a way he never thought possible. Organizing that day at the beach had been a challenge. He had no money and no easy means to get what he needed, but he couldn't let that be an obstacle. He had made a promise, and for the first time in a long time, a promise made by him seemed to have real meaning. Eduardo worked for days doing odd jobs, cleaning yards, washing cars, anything that would allow him to earn enough to buy bus tickets and a simple lunch. When he handed the coins to the bus driver that morning, his heart raced. It was the first time he had done something for someone else in years. Now he was there, watching Elena live her dream. She ran from one place to another, stopping occasionally to look at the waves, as if she wanted to commit every detail to memory. Eduardo shouted, "Elena!" waving to her. "Come feel the sea!" He hesitated for a moment, but her smile was irresistible. He walked slowly toward the water, feeling the warm sand under his feet. When the first wave touched his ankles, a memory came back to him, a memory of when he played with his little daughter on a similar day. Elena took his hand, pulling him toward the water. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked, her eyes shining like the sea itself. Eduardo nodded, but his voice failed him. It was more than beautiful. It was life. It was something he thought he would never feel again. As the day progressed, Eduardo watched Elena marvel at every little thing: the smell of the sea, the taste of cotton candy she managed to buy, the texture of the sand between her toes. Each laugh from her seemed to push a little more light into him. In a moment of pause, Elena sat down on the sand next to him, with her notebook open on her lap. She began to draw the sea, the colorful buckets of children playing in the distance, and in one corner of the page, she drew Eduardo with a small phrase next to it: "My friend who brought me here, the sea." Eduardo saw what she was drawing and felt tears welling up. He tried to hide them, but Helena noticed. "Why are you crying?" she asked with genuine curiosity. "It's just that I started trying to find the words. I didn't know something so simple could be so important." Elena smiled and took his hand again. "It's because you brought me the sea, and that means everything." At that moment, Eduardo realized something he had never felt so clearly before. Not only was he helping Elena fulfill her dreams, she was also helping him find himself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Eduardo promised himself that this was only the beginning. He looked at Elena, who was now drawing the sunset in her notebook, and felt a certainty grow in his heart. He would do the impossible to fulfill all her dreams, because she deserved it, he thought. Another day, the sky was sunny, and the park seemed like a refuge of life and joy. Eduardo pushed Elena's swing, listening to her laughter as the wind fluttered her colorful scarf. Each laugh seemed to dispel the shadows he carried. But deep down, Eduardo knew that the world around him was not always as welcoming as that moment between him and Elena. As the little girl went up and down on the swing, he began to feel the glances. At first, it was just one or two people sitting on the farthest benches, murmuring and casting glances full of questions and judgment. Eduardo tried to ignore it, focusing only on Elena's smile, but the whispers began to intensify. "Who is he?" one woman whispered to another, not so discreetly. "Did you see his clothes? He looks like one of those who lives on the street. Do you think it's safe to leave him with the girl?" replied the other, casting a sidelong glance. Eduardo heard every word as if they were blows. He felt his chest tighten, the weight of his past rising like a shadow he couldn't escape. He knew that to these people, he was just that strange man with a story no one wanted to hear. He looked at Elena, who was still laughing on the swing, completely oblivious to what was happening. Eduardo began to wonder if he should leave. Maybe he shouldn't be here. Maybe they were right. But before he could back away, an unexpected voice brought him back to reality. "He's my hero." Elena had stopped the swing by herself and now looked directly at the people who were whispering. Her voice, although soft, had a weight that overcame everything around her. "He gave me back my notebook and is helping me fulfill my dreams." She continued with a conviction that Eduardo had never heard before. "He's not what you think he is. Special." Her words were like a shield protecting Eduardo from everything. He felt his eyes fill with tears, but he tried to hold them back. How could such a little girl have so much strength? He knelt down next to Elena, who had already returned to the swing, and whispered, "Thank you, little Elena." She looked at him, smiling as if nothing had happened. "You don't have to thank me. You're my friend, and friends take care of each other." Eduardo felt a strength that had long since disappeared within him. Other people's judgment still weighed heavily on him, but now he had something greater to carry: Elena's love and trust. As he pushed the swing again, a question formed in his mind. Will the world ever see in me what she sees? It was a quiet night with a clear, starry sky. The cool air carried the soft scent of wet grass, and Elena, sitting in the small makeshift patio, looking up as if she were talking to infinity. Eduardo, at her side, adjusted a tarp and some old blankets he had managed to gather, creating what he called the Magi tent. "I think it's ready," he said, taking a step back to admire the makeshift structure. "It's not a palace, but—" Elena interrupted him with a smile that made it seem as if he had built something magnificent. "It's perfect." She lay down on the blanket spread out on the ground, with her arms open, and pointed to the sky. "Look at all the stars, Eduardo," she said with shining eyes. "Do you think we can get there someday?" Eduardo sat down next to her, crossing his legs. He looked at the sky for a moment, feeling small in the immensity, but also grateful to be there. "I think we can, in a way," he replied with a shy smile. "Maybe not with rockets or spaceships, but with our dreams." Helena laughed, a soft sound full of life. "You're funny, Eduardo. But you know what? I think stars are like dreams. Some shine brighter than others, but they're all there, waiting for someone to look at them." The wisdom in her voice left him speechless for a moment. He looked at Elena with eyes full of a light that seemed brighter than any star in the sky, and he felt a lump in his throat. "You think that because you're special, Elena?" She turned her head toward him, frowning with an expression of feigned indignation. "I'm not special. I'm just myself. Now tell me a story, Eduardo." She laughed, surprised by the simplicity of the request. "A story?" "Yes, all camps have stories." She settled herself more comfortably under the blanket, pulling it up to her chin. "I want to know what you were like when you were a child." Eduardo was silent for a moment, looking at the stars. He hadn't talked about his childhood in years, but something about Elena brought back the memories. "Well, I was a kid who also liked to dream," he began, with a sad smile. "I always said I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to travel far away and see things that no one had seen before." "And why didn't you do it?" Elena asked with genuine curiosity that seemed to strike a chord with Eduardo. He hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. "I think that sometimes life takes us down paths we didn't plan, and when we realize it, We are very far from our dreams." Elena was silent for a moment, looking at him with a serious expression. "But now you've found a path, right?" Her words were like a ray of light illuminating something inside Eduardo that he was still trying to understand. He looked at her with his eyes shining in the darkness of the night and realized that maybe she was right. "I think I did find it," he replied, feeling his voice tremble. They spent the rest of the night sharing stories. Eduardo told her about his childhood, how he liked to draw and create worlds in his imagination. Helena told him about her dreams, the things she still wanted to see and do. As the hours passed, their magical tent seemed to become smaller, more cozy, as if the entire universe were concentrated in that small courtyard. When Elena finally fell asleep with her notebook beside her and a smile on her face, Eduardo remained awake, looking up at the sky. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe stars are like dreams, he thought, and maybe there's still time to reach some of them. The night was silent, and the small courtyard seemed like a magical refuge under the starry sky. Eduardo had finally fallen asleep too, leaning against the makeshift canvas that served as a tent. Suddenly, a low, broken sound broke the peace. Eduardo woke up with a start, and when he turned around, he saw Elena curled up, struggling to breathe. Her hand was shaking as she clutched her chest, her eyes wide open with fear. Helena screamed, Eduardo's voice filled with panic. He knelt down next to her, trying to stay calm, but the sound of her irregular breathing echoed like an alarm in his head. "Mommy," Elena whispered, in a weak, almost imperceptible voice. Eduardo tried to wake Camila, but there was no time to lose. Without thinking twice, he picked Elena up in his arms, feeling her small, fragile body trembling against his. "Everything will be okay, I promise," he said, trying to believe his own words. As he began to run, the road to the hospital seemed endless. Eduardo barely felt the cold of the night or the fatigue in his legs as he made his way through the dark streets, holding Elena care as if the slightest movement could hurt her. But every second was a cruel reminder of how powerless he felt in the face of her fragility. "Hang in there, little one. Just a little longer," he repeated, the desperation growing in his voice. Elena's eyes opened briefly, and she looked at him with an expression that broke his heart. Even in the midst of her pain, she tried to smile. "You're my hero, remember?" she said in a faint voice. Those words made Eduardo run even faster, as if the weight of the world were on his shoulders. He knew he couldn't fail her. Not now. When he arrived at the hospital, he ran in screaming for help. The medical team came immediately, taking Elena from his arms and placing her on a stretcher. Eduardo stood at the entrance, his heart racing, as he watched the emergency room doors close in front of him. Suddenly, the world fell silent. All he could hear was the sound of his own heavy breathing and Elena's words echoing in his mind. "You're my hero." He sat down on the cold hospital floor, covering his face with his hands as the tears finally fell. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. Camila arrived minutes later, her face pale and worry reflected in her eyes. "Where is she?" she asked, almost breathless. Eduardo pointed to the emergency room doors, unable to speak. Camila sat down next to him, squeezing his hand as if she wanted to share the weight of the moment. "You're strong, Eduardo." "My girl is so strong," Cam said, but her voice trembled with fear. Eduardo didn't answer. He looked at the sky through the hospital window, seeing the same stars that hours earlier had been a symbol of hope. Now they seemed distant and inaccessible. "What if I can't save her?" The question echoed in his mind like a scream, but deep down, another voice whispered, "I promise. Don't give up now." He clenched his fist, gathering all the strength he had left. It seemed like an eternity, but Eduardo knew that no matter what happened, he would be there for Elena. After all, she believed in him like no one else had before, and he couldn't let her down. The clock on the hospital wall seemed to move slower than ever. Eduardo and Camila sat on hard chairs next to each other, the weight of the weight suffocating the air between them. Behind the closed doors of the emergency room, Elena was fighting, and every second without news seemed like a century. Eduardo looked at his trembling hands in his lap. Trapped in dark thoughts, he had promised to help Helena fulfill all her dreams. But now that promise seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. "Eduardo." Camila's voice broke the silence. Soft, but full of pain. He looked up at her. Camila's face was gaunt, and the tears she was trying to hold back glistened under the cold hospital light. "I need to tell you something." He felt his heart tighten. Her tone carried a weight he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. "Elena's condition has worsened," Camila began, taking a deep breath to gather her strength. "The doctors told us a few weeks ago that there is nothing more they can do. It's a matter of days." Eduardo was paralyzed. Her words echoed in his mind like a thunderclap, leaving him breathless. He muttered, shaking his head. "That can't be true. She's full of life. She's so strong." Camila nodded, letting the tears finally fall. "She's stronger than anyone I've ever known, but that's not enough to beat the disease." Eduardo felt the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Instead, he looked down the empty hallway, the bright, impersonal lights of the hospital reflecting the internal battle he didn't know how to fight. "I've tried to prepare my heart for this," Eduardo continued, Camila's voice breaking. "But the truth is, no matter how hard I try to convince myself, it's not enough. Impersonal hospital lights reflecting the internal battle he didn't know how to fight. I've tried to prepare my heart for this," Eduardo continued. Camila's voice broke. "But the truth is, no matter how hard I try to convince myself, we'll never be ready to say goodbye." Those words were like a final blow. Eduardo lowered his head, hiding his face in his hands as tears slid silently down his cheeks. He had failed, or at least that's how he felt. He couldn't protect her. He couldn't do more for her. Camila placed her hand on his, squeezing it tightly. "But she believes in you, Eduardo. I see how she looks at you, how you make her smile. She still has dreams because you are here." Eduardo looked up, seeing the sincerity in Camila's eyes. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. "How can I help if time is against us?" Camila took a deep breath, searching for strength where there was none left. "Time doesn't matter, Eduardo. What matters is what you do with it." That phrase remained etched in his mind, echoing like an urgent reminder. He wiped his tears with his shirt sleeve as a new determination began to form within him. He couldn't change fate, but maybe he could still do something. Maybe there was still time to give Elena a little more happiness, to make her days as special as she deserved. When the doors to the emergency room finally opened, the doctor walked toward them. Eduardo stood up with a heavy heart, but with a new promise in mind. He wouldn't give up, not while Elena was still dreaming. The doctor said that finally opened, and the doctor walked toward them. Eduardo stood up with a heavy heart, but with a new promise in mind. He would not give up, not while Elena was still dreaming. The doctor said she was stable now, but that there was not much else to do, except wait. He also told them they could go see her. The hospital room was simple, but Elena seemed to transform it into something magical with her presence. The notebook was on her bedside table, open pages, revealing new and colorful strokes she had just made. Eduardo was sitting next to her, holding her small hands, while the afternoon sun streamed through the window, bathing everything in golden light. "Look, Eduardo." Elena's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a contagious joy as she turned the page. "I made another drawing, Eduardo." He leaned over to see it. On the page was a vast sky painted a blue so clear it seemed infinite. There were no clouds, just the soft glow of the sun, and a small figure of a girl sitting on a hill looking up. "It's beautiful," Helena smiled, but the lump in her throat was inevitable. "What does it mean?" She looked at the drawing, her eyes shining with a mixture of happiness and melancholy. "It's the place where I'll wait for you." Her words hit Eduardo like a bolt of lightning. He blinked, trying to process what she had said. "Wait for me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elena nodded without looking away from the drawing. "Mom always says that special people become stars in the sky when they leave, but I want to go to a place like this, where the sky is blue and beautiful." She smiled a small but tender smile. "And I want you to go there someday too, Eduardo." Eduardo felt tears welling up in his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. He didn't want Elena to see his despair, not when she was so calm, so full of faith. "I don't want to think about that now, Elena. You still have many dreams to fulfill, remember?" She turned to him, squeezing his hand firmly. "Don't be sad, Eduardo. It's just a beautiful place where I can rest a little." The lump in Eduardo's throat made it impossible for him to speak. He looked at the drawing again, feeling that the image had captured something greater than words could explain. "You know you'll find me there?" Elena asked with a look that seemed to see right into him. Eduardo took a deep breath, trying to gather the strength to respond. "I promise, Elena, but only after we fulfill all your dreams here." Elena smiled again and returned to the drawing, beginning to color in the details with quiet concentration. Eduardo watched her, feeling an overwhelming mixture of sadness and admiration. How could a child face something so inevitable with such courage? And how could he, a broken man, be so full of love and determination to keep her smiling? As Elena continued drawing, Eduardo looked out the window at the sky. There was no doubt he would find that place, that blue sky. But until then, he would give his all to make every moment by her side worthwhile. "I'm going to fight, little one. I'm going to fight for every one of your smiles," he thought, feeling the tears finally fall. And he didn't care to cry. "Understood. I will translate the entire text without omitting anything. Here is the complete translation." The days passed, but Eduardo's nights were tormented while Elena faced her battle with a strength that seemed superhuman. Eduardo immersed himself in memories he was trying to forget. He had promised Elena that he would fulfill her dreams, but deep down, he knew he was running away from something that was holding him back. His own past. One afternoon, while arranging the small backpack he used to carry Elena's drawings, Eduardo found something he hadn't seen in years. It was an old photo of his wife Clara and his daughter Isabella, taken on an ordinary day in the backyard of their house. In the picture, Clara was holding Isabella in her arms, both smiling as if the world were a safe place. The impact of that memory was like a blow to the chest. Eduardo sat on the floor, holding the photo with trembling hands. Suddenly, he realized there was something he needed to do, something he had been putting off out of fear and guilt. The next morning, Eduardo went to the cemetery where Clara and Isabella were buried. He hadn't been there since the day of the funeral, unable to face the crushing pain of having lost everything. But now, something inside him was pushing him to face it. When he arrived, the place was silent, with only the soft sound of the trees moving in the wind. Eduardo walked slowly, feeling the weight of each step. Finally, he stopped in front of the tombstones bearing the names of his wife and daughter, Clara and Isabella. He whispered with a trembling voice, "I miss you so much." Eduardo fell to his knees, crying uncontrollably. He had spent years running away from this moment, but now he could no longer ignore the pain and guilt. "I failed you," he said between sobs. "I should have been stronger. I should have done more." As he cried, something caught his attention on Clara's grave. There was a small bouquet of fresh flowers carefully placed on it. He picked up the card that came with the bouquet and saw the name Anna written on it. Anna, his former sister-in-law. Eduardo murmured in surprise. He hadn't seen her since the accident, and a question began to form in his mind. Why did she keep coming here? What did she still believe about me? Driven by curiosity and the need for answers, Eduardo decided to look for Anna. He went to her house without knowing if she would even receive him. When she opened the door and saw him, her eyes widened in surprise. "Eduardo, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice charged with emotion. "I saw the flowers on Clara's grave," he said uncertainly. "I needed to talk to you." Anna let him in. Although she was clearly hesitant, they sat down in the small living room with a silence that felt almost tangible. Eduardo sensed that she was expecting something, so he finally spoke. "I'm so sorry for everything, for disappearing, for not being here, for everything that happened." Anna looked at him, and her eyes softened. "I never blamed you, Eduardo. You lost as much as I did, or maybe more. You suffered more." Anna's words took him by surprise. He had spent years believing that everyone saw him as guilty, but now, sitting there, he realized that perhaps he was the one who never forgave himself. Anna got up and went to a drawer where she took out an aged envelope. She returned and handed it to Eduardo. "Clara wrote this for you. I found it after the accident, but I never had the courage to give it to you." Eduardo opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in Clara's delicate handwriting. He began to read, and each word was like an embrace from the past. "My love, I want you to know something. You are the best father and husband you could be. Never stop believing in the good, Eduardo. No matter how difficult life may be, the world still needs people like you. I know you can make a difference. I love you." Eduardo closed his eyes, letting the tears flow uncontrollably. He held the letter to his chest, as if trying to absorb every word. "Clara believed in you," Ana said with a sad smile, "and I think she would be happy to see you now." Eduardo looked at Ana, and something inside him changed. For the first time in years, he felt he could carry the past without being destroyed by it. He didn't know what the future held, but he understood that now he had something to fulfill: Clara's promise. Elena was sitting on the bed with a notebook in her hands and a sparkle in her eyes that Eduardo recognized as hope. She drew with determination, her pen gliding across the pages as if she were creating something magical. Eduardo watched her in silence, curious about what was being born on those pages. "What are you drawing now, little one?" he asked with a smile, trying to hide the lump in his throat he felt when he saw her so fragile and so full of life. Elena lifted the notebook to show him. It was a picture of the park where it all began. But this time, it was transformed into a place that looked like something out of a fairy tale. The trees were covered with colored lights. Children were playing in circles and dancing, and the sky was starry, without a single cloud. "I want the park to look like this," she said with shining eyes. "Full of lights, music, and joy. A place where everyone could be happy, even if only for one night." Eduardo looked at the drawing and felt a lump in his throat. He knew that Elena wasn't just talking about lights or music. She wanted to create a moment of pure happiness, something that could last beyond her. "It's a beautiful dream, Elena," he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. "And you know what that means, right?" Elena smiled, as if she already knew what he was going to say, that we're going to make it happen. Make it happen. And so the plan began. Eduardo knew he couldn't do it alone, but for the first time, he felt he had the strength to ask for help. He began going door to door around the park, explaining what he wanted to do. At first, he was met with suspicious looks, but the story of Elena and her dream notebook soon began to touch hearts. "It's for a special girl," he explained. "Someone who has very little time but a huge heart." The neighbors began to mobilize. They donated lights, prepared food, and even improvised a small stage in the center of the park. Everyone worked together enthusiastically, and Eduardo felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: a true connection with people. On the night of the event, the park was transformed. The trees glowed with colored lights, lanterns illuminated the paths, and the sound of laughter and music filled the air. Children ran from one side to the other, their faces lit up with smiles that seemed to even the most serious adults. When Elena arrived in a wheelchair pushed by Camila, she was speechless. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared at the stage in front of her. Eduardo said, his voice breaking with emotion, "It's exactly like in my drawing." He knelt beside her, taking her hand. "No, Helena, it's even better." Elena smiled, and at that moment Eduardo knew he had managed to give her something that no illness could take away. After the party ended, the park was silent again, but now it was filled with memories that seemed engraved in the trees and stars. Camila was sitting on one of the benches watching Elena, who had fallen asleep in her wheelchair with a smile on her lips. Eduardo approached and sat down next to her. "I think we did it," he said, looking tenderly at Elena. "Camila." She looked at him, and Eduardo saw that her eyes were filled with tears. "Eduardo, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," he replied quickly, shaking his head. "I did it for her." Camila took his hand and squeezed it tightly. "You did more than just fulfill one of her dreams. You brought joy to her life and to mine as well. Even in the most difficult moments, you gave us something I thought I would never have again: hope." Eduardo swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He looked at Elena, who was sleeping peacefully, and realized that for the first time in years, he had done something that really mattered. "I just did what she taught me to do, he said, quietly. To believe in good, even when all seems lost. Camila smiled, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Then I think you didn't just bring light to the park, Eduardo. You brought light to our lives. As they looked up at the starry sky, Eduardo felt that something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer the lost man who had taken that backpack in the park. Now he was someone who could make a difference. Someone who could continue to bring light to the world. And that, he thought, looking at Elena, is the biggest promise I've ever made. It was a quiet morning, and Elena's room was lit by the soft sunlight coming through the window. Her notebook was on her lap as usual, but this time Elena wasn't drawing. She was looking at Eduardo with a mischievous smile, as if she were planning something. Eduardo, have you ever thought about drawing? She asked suddenly, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Eduardo laughed, surprised by the unexpected question. No, I haven't done that since I was a child. I don't think I'm any good at it. Elena rolled her eyes, feigning impatience. Being good or bad doesn't matter. Drawing is just putting your heart on paper. I bet you can do it. She held out the notebook, holding a pencil in her other hand. Eduardo looked at the notebook, hesitating, as if that simple act were a greater challenge than anything he had ever faced before. Come on, Eduardo, Elena encouraged him with an encouraging smile. Just try it. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the pencil and began to scribble on the blank page. His strokes were clumsy at first, but as he continued, something began to emerge. He drew the illuminated park, the magical event they had created together. The lights, the trees, and even Elena in her wheelchair were there, simple but full of life. When he finished, Eduardo looked at the drawing in surprise. I think it turned out pretty well, he murmured, as if he still couldn't believe it. Elena took the notebook and looked at the drawing carefully. Her eyes sparkled with admiration, and she smiled as if she were holding a masterpiece. It's perfect. I told you you could do it. Eduardo felt a different kind of warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time, pride in himself. He realized that this drawing was not just an image on paper. It was a piece of something he had forgotten, his ability to create, to imagine, to leave his mark on the world. Maybe I should draw more, he said, smiling. Not maybe, definitely, Elena replied, laughing. You have a hidden talent, Eduardo. You were just waiting for the right moment to come out. And as they laughed together, Eduardo realized that this moment was more than just a rediscovery. It was a connection, a gift that Elena had unwittingly given him, the opportunity to see something good within himself. The following days brought a change that Eduardo feared but did not want to accept. Elena began to sleep more. Her energy, which had previously seemed infinite, was now scarce. Her words became rarer, as if each one cost more than it should. He sat by her side, holding her hand. While she slept with her notebook resting next to the bed, he tried to convince himself that this was just a phase, and that she would soon wake up full of energy again. But deep down, he knew better. He saw the shadow of farewell approaching, silent and relentless. One afternoon, while he was drawing next to Elena, she woke up and looked at him. What are you drawing? She asked in a weak voice, but still full of curiosity. Eduardo showed her the paper. It was a drawing of a giant, colorful balloon floating in the sky. I'm drawing the next dream we're going to fulfill, he said, trying to sound confident. Elena smiled, but there was something different about that smile. It was sweet, but it had a touch of sadness, as if she knew something he didn't want to admit. It's beautiful. Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. You make dreams look even more beautiful on paper. He squeezed her hand tightly, fighting back tears. And I'm going to make this dream come true, little one. I promise you. Elena opened her eyes again, and although weak, looked at him with the same strength that had always inspired him. I always wanted to fly, Eduardo. I wanted to know how the wind feels, to see the world tiny down there. But I want it to be like this, with you and Mom. She looked at him with an expression that was at once full of hope and a silent acceptance that Eduardo still couldn't bear. Do you think we can do it? The question was simple, but Eduardo knew the weight it carried. He took her hand carefully, as if holding something as fragile as glass, and took a deep breath before answering. "Not only can we, Elena, we will do it. I promise you, Elena." She smiled a small but meaningful smile. "A true promise." Eduardo nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "A true promise." She closed her eyes for a moment, hugging the notebook to her chest. Eduardo watched her, feeling the enormity of what he had promised. He knew that this was not just about fulfilling her dream of flying in a balloon. It was about giving her something that would transcend the pain, something she could carry with her no matter what happened. While Elena slept, Eduardo looked at the drawing, running his fingers over the delicate lines. The drawing seemed incomplete, as if something was still to be revealed. "I'm going to fulfill this dream, Helena," she thought with renewed determination. "No matter what it takes, you're going to fly." She knew time was against her, but at that moment, nothing else mattered but fulfilling the promise she had just made. The morning was cold, but the sky was a cloudless blue, perfect for what Eduardo had planned. After days of fighting against time, doing everything possible to get the necessary support, the day had finally arrived. Elena was wrapped in a soft blanket, sitting in a wheelchair with Camila by her side, while Eduardo adjusted the last details of the large, colorful balloon that was preparing to take off. When Elena saw the balloon for the first time, her eyes lit up like never before. "It's exactly like in my drawing," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Eduardo knelt down beside her, taking her hand tenderly. "I told you we would make it happen, right, Elena?" She looked at him with tears in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of happiness. "You always keep your promises," Elena said. With the help of the team preparing the balloon, Elena was carefully placed inside the basket with Eduardo and Camila by her side. When the balloon began to rise, the girl squeezed Eduardo's hand tightly, her face divided between excitement and a touch of nervousness. "We're flying," she whispered with a smile that seemed to contain the entire universe. Eduardo looked at her and felt a wave of emotions so strong that he could respond. "Yes, little one, we're flying." As the balloon rose, the world below grew smaller, and the horizon opened up before them. Elena looked at everything with shining eyes, absorbing every detail. The wind caressed her face, and she laughed, a pure and contagious sound that made Camila and Eduardo smile along with her. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," said Elena, leaning slightly to see more. "It's as if the world was made of dreams." Eduardo didn't answer. He just looked at her, recording every moment of that instant in his memory. He knew that for Elena, this was more than a ride. It was the culmination of her struggle, the realization of something that transcended pain. When the balloon reached its highest point, Elena looked at Eduardo and squeezed his hand tightly. "Thank you, Eduardo, for everything," he swallowed, feeling tears well up. "It is I who thank you, Elena, for teaching me what really matters." She smiled, and in that moment, Eduardo felt that there was nothing in the world more important than her smile. Time passed as they admired the landscape and enjoyed every second. The balloon began to descend slowly, but Elena's smile remained as radiant as the sun shining above them. When they finally touched the ground, Eduardo helped Elena out of the basket, carrying her in his arms. "That was perfect," she said in a soft voice, but one full of emotion. Later, as they rested in the shade of a tree, Elena looked at Eduardo with a serious but tender expression. "Eduardo, can I ask you something?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. He nodded, leaning in to hear her better. "When I become a little star in the sky, do you promise to keep helping other people fulfill their dreams?" Her words struck him like thunder. Eduardo looked at Elena, feeling his heart tighten, but he knew he couldn't avoid that promise. Elena began with a trembling voice. "You don't have to worry about that now. We still have time." She smiled softly, but there was a deep wisdom in her eyes. "Maybe not as much as you think, but while I'm here, I want to know that you'll still be the Eduardo who makes people believe in their dreams." Eduardo felt tears roll down his face as he took Elena's hand. Tightly. "I promise you, Elena, with all my heart, I promise you." She closed her eyes for a moment with a peaceful smile on her face. "Then everything is fine," she whispered, The days that followed the balloon ride were a mixture of joy and melancholy. Eduardo noticed that the sparkle in Elena's eyes was slowly fading, like a candle fighting against the wind. Even so, she continued to hold her sketchbook when she had the strength and smiling at Eduardo and Camila, as if to say that everything was fine. That afternoon, the sky was tinged with gray, reflecting the weight that everyone felt. Eduardo sat next to Elena's bed, holding her small, cold hand. Camila was nearby with swollen eyes, trying to stay strong but clearly fighting against the inevitable. Eduardo called Elena's name in a weak but still sweet voice. He leaned closer, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "Here I am, little one." She lifted the notebook with difficulty, showing him the last page. It was a simple drawing, but full of meaning. She was in the balloon, surrounded by stars, looking down where Eduardo and Camila waved to her. "I finished it," she whispered with a small smile. "Now my notebook is complete." Eduardo looked at the drawing, and the lump in his throat tightened. He knew those words meant more than what she said. He knew Elena was ready to leave. "It's beautiful, Elena. It's perfect," he said with a trembling voice. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and then squeezed Eduardo's hand one last time. "Thank you for making me fly." Those were her last words. A few moments later, Elena let go of Eduardo's hand, still clutching the notebook to her chest. The room fell silent, a silence so heavy it seemed to crush everything around it. Eduardo felt a void open up inside him, a dark abyss that dragged him back to the place where he had been before he met Elena. He fell to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming uncontrollably, holding her hand, which was now oceanless. He murmured in a broken voice, "Not again." Camila hugged him, also crying but trying to find strength. She was at peace. Eduardo was happy. "Thanks to you," those words echoed in Eduardo's mind, but they did not seem to ease the pain. He looked at Elena, so small, so fragile, and felt that the world had lost something irreplaceable. That night, Eduardo remained alone in the room, sitting on the floor next to Elena's bed, holding her notebook as if it were a piece of her. Still alive, each page was a reminder of the dreams they had shared, of the promises he had made. But now what would he do? How could he go on, when everything seemed so empty again? "I thought I couldn't go through this again," he thought, tears rolling down his face. "But she believed in me, and I promised." Although the pain was unbearable, a small light began to shine in the midst of the darkness. Eduardo looked at Elena's last drawing and felt that she was still there, in the stars, in the blue sky she had dreamed of so much. And for the first time, he whispered something to himself. "I will go on. Helena, I promised." The same trees that had once witnessed the first encounters between Eduardo, Elena, and Camila now shone with colored lights, as if each branch had been touched by the magic of Elena's dreams. The sky was clear, and the stars, visible as tiny points of light, seemed to watch the celebration from above. Eduardo walked among the people with Elena's notebook in his hands, feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude. Every page of that notebook had been transformed into panels displayed throughout the park. Her drawings were everywhere: the colorful balloon, the blue sky, the beach, and even the illuminated park she had imagined. And now, it was there in front of everyone. Camila stood next to Eduardo, holding a star-shaped lantern that glowed with a soft light. Her face showed the pain of mourning, but her eyes reflected the same feeling of hope she had seen in Elena so many times. "She would love this," Camila said, her voice breaking, "but full of love. It's exactly how she dreamed it would be." Eduardo nodded, looking at the crowd that had gathered to pay tribute to Elena. Children ran through the park, laughing as they held colorful balloons. Adults looked at the drawings with tears in their eyes, moved by the simplicity and depth of the dreams of such a young girl. In the center of the park, Eduardo and Camila had prepared a special space with a large screen showing memories of moments spent with Elena, her playing on the swing, drawing with Eduardo, laughing while holding cotton candy on the beach, and finally, the smile she gave on the balloon, a smile that seemed to light up everything around her. When soft music began to play, Eduardo climbed onto a small makeshift stage, holding Elena's notebook carefully as if it were the most valuable object in the world. Elena taught us something that many of us have forgotten. She began with a trembling but firm voice and showed us that dreams don't have to be big to be important. They just have to be sincere. People fell silent, listening to every word. Every drawing of hers, every page of this notebook, is a reminder that life is too short not to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And that is why we are here today, to celebrate the light she brought to all of us. Eduardo took a deep breath, feeling tears welling up, but he continued. Elena is gone, but she left a legacy of love, hope, and courage. And I promise you, as I promised her, that this light will never go out. He raised the notebook toward the sky, and at that moment, Camila released the first star-shaped lantern. In a matter of seconds, dozens of other lanterns were released by the crowd, slowly rising into the dark sky, illuminating the park with a beauty that seemed magical. Eduardo looked at the lanterns, feeling that Elena was there in every sparkle, in every smile of the children, in every tear that ascended into the sky. One afternoon, while looking at the drawing of the blue sky, Eduardo had an idea. He took a blank sheet of paper and began to write something he hadn't done in years. Simple words, but full of meaning, began to emerge. Making dreams come true is more than an act. It is changing lives. It is giving hope. It was then that Eduardo decided to create something that would take Elena's dreams beyond the pages of his notebook. With the help of Camila and people who had connected with Elena's story, he founded an organization dedicated to making the dreams of children with serious illnesses come true. The name of the NGO was simple, but full of meaning. Blue Sky, Elena's Dreams. On the first day of operation, Eduardo looked at the sign with the name of the NGO and felt something different. It wasn't just pride. It was the feeling that he had finally found a purpose that gave meaning to everything he had experienced. This is for you, little one, he whispered, looking up at the sky. For a moment, he thought he saw a star shining brighter. With a smile on his face and Elena's notebook by his side, Eduardo entered the building, ready to help others dream like her. In recent weeks, Eduardo had been immersed in something that Elena had given him back, his love of art. He had decided that he needed to paint, not just anything, but the dream that Elena always mentioned, the blue sky. As he drew, her words echoed in his mind like a whisper. That's where I'll wait for you. Each stroke was filled with emotion. Eduardo used a blue so deep that it seemed to reflect infinity itself, without clouds, only the soft light of the sun that Elena loved so much. In the lower corner, he drew a little girl sitting on the grass, looking toward the horizon. It was Elena, at peace, as he liked to imagine her. Now, when he finished, Eduardo stepped back, looking at the painting with tears in his eyes. He knew he couldn't change destiny, but that image was his way of keeping her alive in his heart. He hung the painting in a special place in his house, above the table where he now planned the next steps for the NGO. This is our sky, Helena said softly, looking at the painting, and it always will be. Months passed, and the work at the NGO began to grow. Eduardo had helped several children fulfill their own dreams, but deep down, he knew that something was calling him back to the place where it all began, the park. It was a sunny morning when Eduardo returned to the park. He walked slowly, passing between the trees that were now greener and the swings that Elena loved. The place seemed different, but at the same time, it held all the memories he cherished so much. Children ran and played, their laughter filling the air with joy. Eduardo paused for a moment, observing as if he were seeing the park through Elena's eyes. He could almost hear her voice asking him to push her on the swing or showing him one of her drawings. He approached a bench where she used to sit and found something that made him smile, a small drawing of a colored balloon made with crayons on the ground to one side. He looked around, searching for who could have drawn it, but saw no one. "Thank you for everything, little one," he murmured with tears in his eyes, feeling as if she were still there somehow. At that moment, Eduardo understood that Elena had never really left him. She was in the laughter of the children, in the trees swaying in the wind, in the sunlight shining through the park. That same afternoon, while Eduardo was organizing papers at the NGO, Camila appeared at the door. She was holding an envelope in her hands, with a soft smile on her face. "Eduardo, I found this among Elena's things. I think it's for you." Eduardo took the envelope carefully, immediately recognizing Elena's delicate handwriting. His heart tightened as he opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written with effort, but full of love. "Dear Eduardo, if you are reading this, it's because I'm in the blue sky I drew. I don't want you to be sad, because now I can see you from everywhere. You made me fly, Eduardo. You made all my dreams come true, and I will never forget that. You were the sun that lit up my days, even when everything seemed dark. Please continue to help other children dream. They need you as much as I needed you. I love you very much. With love, Helena." Tears fell silently down Eduardo's face as he read. He pressed the letter to his chest, feeling each word like a hug from Helena. "Thank you, Helena," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I promise I will continue." Camila sat down next to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I knew how important you were to her, Eduardo, and now you are important to many other children." Eduardo looked at the letter again, feeling the weight of the promise he had made to Helena. He knew that as long as he kept her memory alive, she would never truly be far away. "I am the sun you saw in me," Helena thought with a smile through her tears, "and I will shine for others because of you." The months turned into years, and the small NGO that Eduardo had created began to take on a life of its own. Elena's blue sky dreams became more than a place to fulfill dreams. It became a refuge, a space where children facing difficult battles found hope, joy, and above all, love. Eduardo devoted every minute of his day to work at the NGO. He took care of everything, from the simplest requests to dreams that seemed impossible. Elena's notebook was in a special place in his office, as a constant reminder of why all this existed. Over time, more people joined the cause. Donors, volunteers, and health professionals arrived, each contributing something to help. Eduardo saw in the faces of the children who passed through the NGO the same bright eyes that Elena had. Every smile, every laugh was as if she were there, present in every little moment of happiness. One night, while organizing documents and looking at a mural full of photos of the children who had passed through the NGO, Eduardo felt a wave of emotion. He saw the stories he had helped write. A girl who dreamed of being a dancer dancing on stage. A boy who always wanted to be an astronaut looking at the stars through a telescope. Every dream fulfilled was a piece of Elena's legacy. He sat down in his chair and picked up Elena's notebook once again. Every page was etched in his memory, but at that moment, he noticed something different. "She changed my life. She saved my life," thought Eduardo, his eyes filling with tears. He knew that if he hadn't met Elena, he would probably have remained lost, trapped in the shadows of his past. But she taught him to see the light, to believe in goodness, and above all, to fight for something greater than himself. "I thought I was helping you, Elena, but it was you who helped me." Eduardo looked up at the sky through the window where the stars were shining, just like that night at the makeshift camp. He smiled, feeling that Elena was there watching him. It was a quiet afternoon at the NGO, and Eduardo was walking through the hallways watching the children draw and play. A little girl named Sofia was sitting at a table with a notebook in front of her. She seemed focused, but Eduardo noticed that she was looking at the paper with a mixture of doubt and sadness. "What are you drawing, Sofia?" he asked, sitting down next to her. The girl looked at him with big, sad eyes. "I don't know. I can't think of anything nice today." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. He knew that feeling of emptiness, of lack of hope. He looked at the backpack he was carrying and made a decision he had been putting off for a long time. "You know, Sofia, I have something special for you." He opened his backpack and took out Elena's notebook, holding it carefully. The girl's eyes widened when she saw the notebook. "Is this for me?" Eduardo nodded, smiling. This notebook belonged to a very special girl named Elena. She also drew her dreams here. And you know, she taught me that every dream, no matter how big or small, can be the beginning of something wonderful. Sofia opened the notebook carefully, turning the pages. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at Elena's drawings. each one full of hope and joy. When she reached the last page, where Elena had drawn the colorful balloon with stars in the background, Sofia looked at Eduardo. "What should I draw?" Eduardo took her hand and smiled. "Draw what makes your heart beat faster. What you want most in the world, because from now on, your dreams can come true." Sofia looked at the notebook again and picked up a pencil, beginning to draw. Eduardo watched her, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. Elena's notebook, which had guided so many important moments, was now in the hands of another girl, ready to continue spreading light and hope. As he watched Sofia scribble enthusiastically, Eduardo whispered to himself, she would be proud. Despite everything he had built, the emptiness of Elena's absence still weighed heavily on him. He missed her in every laugh of the children, in every drawing made at the NGO. He knew he was fulfilling his promise, but sometimes he desperately wished to hear her voice, to see that smile that had changed everything. Tired, Eduardo closed his eyes, letting sleep overcome him. It was then that something extraordinary happened. He found himself in a vast field where the sky was a perfect blue with no clouds, exactly like in Elena's final drawing. The air was filled with an indescribable calm, and the soft sound of the wind moved the flowers around him. Eduardo looked up and saw something that made him stop, Elena's colorful balloon floating on the horizon. Eduardo turned at the sound of a voice and saw Elena running toward him. She was healthy and radiant, with a smile that seemed to light up the whole sky. She was wearing the dress that Camila always said was her favorite, and her eyes sparkled like never before. Eduardo fell to his knees with tears streaming down his face before he realized it. Elena whispered with a broken voice. She stopped in front of him, holding his hands tightly, just as she did when she wanted him to believe in something impossible. "I knew you would do it," she said with the purest smile he had ever seen. "Do what, little one?" Eduardo asked incredulously. Helena pointed to the sky where several stars were shining as if they were dancing. "Together to bring light to the world, to bring dreams to those who need them. You did exactly what you promised." Eduardo looked up at the sky, seeing each star as a child who had been touched by the NGO, each one shining thanks to Elena's legacy. "I miss you so much," he said with a trembling voice. Elena squeezed his hands tighter and nodded her head with a look full of tenderness. "I never really left. I'm here in every smile, in every dream you help to fulfill. And when you look up at the sky, I'm also there, watching you and supporting you." Eduardo began to cry, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was a mixture of pain and relief, longing and gratitude. "Thank you, Elena. Thank you for everything." She smiled again and took a step back, beginning to walk away toward the balloon. "Keep believing in the good, Eduardo. Promise?" He nodded, his voice breaking as he said, "I promise, little one. Always." Helena waved goodbye one last time before entering the balloon, which slowly ascended into the blue sky, merging with the horizon. Eduardo woke up suddenly with tears running down his face. He looked at the notebook on the table, and for the first time in a long time, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew that Elena was there in the blue sky he had drawn, smiling at him, and he knew that as long as he kept his promise, she would live on, not only in his memories, but in every dream he helped to fulfill. He knew he would succeed. Those words echoed in his mind, like an eternal reminder that love and hope are stronger than any farewell. The auditorium was full. Soft lights illuminated the stage where Eduardo sat in a simple armchair, with Elena's notebook resting on his legs in front of him. Hundreds of faces watched him in silence, waiting for his words. The audience was diverse: parents, children, young dreamers, and people who had somehow heard about Elena's story and wanted to know more. Eduardo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of each memory. He ran his fingers over the cover of the notebook, as if seeking strength in each drawing. Finally, he looked up and began to speak. "A few years ago, I was a lost man. I had no direction and no hope. The truth is, I was surviving, not living. It was then, on a cold night in the park where I used to hide from the world, I stole something that would change my life forever." The murmuring in the auditorium ceased completely. Everyone was attentive, captivated by the vulnerability in Eduardo's voice. I took a bag from a distracted mother, and inside it, I found this notebook. He held the notebook up for the audience to see. There was no money, nothing of material value, only drawings. Eduardo paused, feeling tears begin to forming in his eyes, but he continued. Those drawings were by Elena, a girl with a smile that could light up the darkest days. She had simple but big dreams: to see the sea, to fly in a balloon, to eat cotton candy, and I promised her that I would fulfill each one of them. As Eduardo spoke, images of Elena's drawings appeared on a large screen behind him. Each simple stroke carried something deeper: hope, joy, and the desire to live life to the fullest. But what I didn't know when I promised to fulfill Elena's dreams was that she would achieve something much greater. She gave me back my life. She taught me to find light even in the darkest moments. Eduardo paused again, swallowing hard. The silence in the room was absolute. He knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Elena is no longer here. His voice trembled, but he gathered his strength to continue. But her legacy lives on, not only in the NGO we created, but in every child who dreams, in every person who chooses to believe in good, even when all seems lost. The audience began to applaud, softly, but Eduardo raised a hand, asking for silence. Today, I am not here just to tell Elena's story. I am here to tell you that we all have the ability to fulfill dreams, to change lives. Sometimes, all someone needs is an opportunity, a promise, a little light. He looked at the notebook once more before closing it carefully. And that is what I want to leave with you. The certainty that even when it seems impossible, there is always a light waiting to be found. I found mine in Helena. When he finished, the audience burst into applause, but Eduardo barely heard them. He looked at the screen where Elena's last drawing, a colorful balloon floating in a starry sky, continued to shine. I did it, little one, he thought with tears in his eyes, and I will never stop telling your story. At that moment, Eduardo felt something that had already become familiar, but still surprised him. Elena's presence, not in words or gestures, but in every heart touched by her story, in every tear shed in that room, in every dream they continued to have thanks to her. As he left the stage, Eduardo knew that even after everything, Elena continued to light the way for him, for the world, and for all the children who needed someone to believe in their dreams. Thank you for watching OFAR. Now answer this. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Write your comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like it and subscribe for similar stories.